Friedrich Nietzsche on art and truth. This is again a conversation between Nigel Warburton, the one that I gave regarding the Platonic Dialogue Symposium. It's very similarly modeled. And here to speak about Nietzsche and art and truth is Aaron Ridley, who's a Nietzsche scholar at the University of Southampton. Now, the question is this, one can start with this question: does art teach us truths? And is that its purpose? By a critical consensus, Friedrich Nietzsche was a very bad composer, and by a universal consensus, he was an absolutely stunning, extraordinary writer and philosopher. Nietzsche took art very seriously, and until they had a massive falling out, he was a very close friend of Richard Wagner. For Nietzsche, the function of art, of music and theatre, was to give us a hint of a truth. The truth that the world was chaotic and meaningless, but equally art had to shield us from this dreadful reality. So the question answer begins. Nigel Warburton. We are going to focus on Nietzsche's ideas about art and truth. Could you say a little bit about Nietzsche's relationship to art? Aaron Ridley. Nietzsche was arguably the most art-obsessed philosopher there's been. Throughout his life, he regarded himself as a serious poet. He also regarded himself as a serious composer, though the evidence of his own compositions was to the contrary. And Nietzsche assigned a very significant place to art. Nigel Warburton. In his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche focused on the art of tragedy, but it illuminated other things about art and truth. Ridley. Nietzsche wrote The Birth of Tragedy under the spell of Schopenhauer, who had thought that the world was an utterly vile and ghastly place. And if one really grasped the nature of it, one would see that the whole thing, that existence itself, was a terrible mistake. Nietzsche took that thought over from Schopenhauer in a way, but where Schopenhauer thought that that was a good reason for renouncing everything and saying a very big no to the world, no to existence, Nietzsche thought that the ancient Greeks had found a way of using the truth that the basic nature of existence is awful to make their culture more energetic, and that they had done so through tragic art. He held that the flourishing of Athenian culture was a function of this. Through their tragedy, the Athenians allowed themselves to get just enough of a hint of the dark, irrational forces that the world really consisted in, while saving themselves from the full impact that the recognition of that would have by laying over it a veil of illusion. So you got a glimpse of the truth, but the truth was made palatable. The pill sweetened by a structure of illusions. That was what was characteristic about their tragedy. You need the truth to energize itself. The well springs of the life force are irrational through and through. But then you need the illusion that art also provides to prevent the energy from blowing you apart. Nigel Warburton. And Nietzsche expressed that through the notion of the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Ridley. Yes, he uses these two god figures to personify various metaphysical levels. The reality which he associates with the god Dionysus is that the world is ultimately chaos and destruction and meaningless striving. Illusion, surface appearance, the stuff we lay over the Dionysian reality to protect ourselves from it, Nietzsche associates with the god Apollo. He thought that in classical Greek tragedy, some absolutely ingenious balance between letting in the Dionysian truth and making it palatable via the Apollonian illusion had been achieved. And this was the unique achievement of classical Greek tragedy. Nigel Warburton. Then in came Socrates and upset that. Ridley. Then in came Socrates and brought about the death of tragedy. Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy is in fact largely devoted to the death of tragedy and to explaining how, in his view, a very different worldview gets put into place, a worldview that he associates with the figure of Socrates, where the irrational is ultimately regarded as unreal. So what Nietzsche had taken the Greeks' insight to be, that the fundamental nature of the world is chaotic and irrational, and so on, was, from the Socratic perspective, impossible. There could be no such world as that, because in the Socratic worldview there was an equation between reason and reality, and indeed goodness. So from Nietzsche's point of view, what happens is that a certain version of the Apollonian, which had previously just been regarded as an illusion, which hid reality from you, becomes reality. And if you start to think of the world like that, in Nietzsche's view, tragedy can no longer do the work that it did. Since on this picture there is no longer any Dionysian reality to get a glimpse of, or indeed to protect yourself from.